Hi, Melody. Welcome back to the show.
So great to be here. Thank you.
All right, so quickly reintroduce yourself to the listeners because last time you came on, we were talking about why your hard work is overlooked, and I want to know what have you been up to since then?
Yes, well, I've been keeping busy writing a whole second book. So my first book, Trust Yourself, came out in 2021. And what I kept hearing from that was, okay, I trust myself. I feel more confident in my worth and what I bring to the table. But all of that falls apart when I have to deal with people that have higher authority than me. And so that was really the genesis for this new book, Managing Up.
It's funny because I feel like in hindsight, you came on here last time to talk about like what to do when your hard work is overlooked, which was clearly like setting the stage for your current book. And I think it's interesting because your book Managing Up really emphasizes taking control of your work experience. I always think it's helpful, especially when we're using terms that maybe are well known, at least in the corporate world, but maybe you haven't actually heard the term managing up. So tell us, what does it mean and why is this essential for your career success?
Well, I think how we think about managing up needs to change. It needs a rebrand because when most people hear that word, they think of, 1980s, 1990s, like running around with your boss's coffee and getting them birthday balloons and knowing their birthday and everything like that. And that is not the modern version of managing up. Put very simply, how I define it is navigating relationships with the people that have more positional power than you. Your boss is a big part of that, but I use that definition specifically because managing up needs to extend beyond your boss. Because if you're not being conscious of the other stakeholders that are around you, you're going to miss out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think that managing up, you naturally think of the people above you. So, when you think of this title or like thinking about managing up in the title of your book, you're at least visually for me, I think of immediately like who's my boss, who's my like skip level manager, like how am I working my way to the top and thinking about those people? And I honestly think that there's a lot of talk about like, well, what about across with your peers and what about the people that you manage? Like we think a lot about managing people that we don't always think about managing up, which is a whole good point of your book that you have coming out. So,
Yeah.
okay, I want to also in the book specifically, you do talk about you outline something called the 10 conversations. Which of these do you think is the most challenging for professionals and why? Maybe you can give a little background about like roughly what are these 10 conversations? Why do they matter? Why are they important to the concept of being better at managing up?
hmm Well, I think maybe many of the listeners have found when you're told, well, you need to manage up, you need to get better at influencing upward or influencing without authority. First of all, just going back to your comment a moment ago, we're working in environments now where you may not just have one boss. You may have sort of a project leader, or you may also have to coordinate and get buy in from your boss's peers. And so the org chart is a little gray and sometimes much messier now. And when we're given this feedback that you need to get better at this skill, usually it's these pithy one-liners like be proactive and come with solutions, not problems. Those are good. They're directionally heading heading in the right direction, but they're not complete. And they really break down when the rubber hits the road and we have to face the pressures and the stresses of the day to day. And so, why I base this book around conversations is because it helps conceptualize what it means to manage up. And it gives you a system and a methodology for doing that in a way that builds from the foundations all the way to more advanced skills, let's say. And so, we start out with, like I said, the foundations, which are really things like alignment. How do you get on the same page with your manager to know you're working on the right things? All the way to the money and quitting conversations. But within those, as I've been talking to people more and more about this book, the one that people keep coming back to and saying, oh, that one is the toughest for me is the boundaries conversation. And it's interesting because I didn't expect that. But, I know on this show, you talk a lot about saying no and work life balance. And so the boundaries conversation is how do you push back when you're getting extra work dumped on your plate, you're being asked to go to yet another meeting that you probably don't need to be in, or you're being asked to work a weekend. What do you do in those situations? Because it's really difficult to just say flat out no to your manager. Most of us would feel really uncomfortable doing it and wouldn't be good for our reputations. And so this is about how do you tactfully push back and say no? And part of that begins with really understanding what is your pushback power, because we all have invisible leverage that we may or may not be aware of. And that can include everything from how long have you been with the organization? Is your skill set really valuable to the point where it would be hard to replace you? They may be more likely to work with you on flexibility because you're so valuable to them, all the way to things like your boss's attitude, the company culture. And depending on your level of pushback power, and there's a whole sort of rubric in the book to rate yourself. But if you have higher pushback power, you can be much more direct with your pushback. You can say, this is not something I can take on, go to so and so. But if your pushback power is on the lower side, you need to be deferential, maybe a bit more collaborative in how you say no. One of my favorite ways to do that in all of these cases is to start by asking questions. So I think many of us, when we're put on the spot, someone says, "Oh, could you just help with this? You'd be really great at this. Really love a hand." We either get defensive and snap at them because we're stressed and we say, "No way, I have too much on my plate." Or us people pleasers, recovering people pleasers, will say, "Sure, yeah, sure, I'll find a way to fit that in magically." And so the best thing you can do in those cases is to ask questions, to dig for details, because you never know when a project may actually be an opportunity. On the face of it, it may seem like an inconvenience, but if you ask, like, who is involved with this? What's driving the urgency? Who else will this be visible to? When you ask those questions, you get a better sense of what's involved, and you can weigh more. Number one, could this be a chance for me to get exposure or skills that I may want? And number two, in asking those questions, you may get a piece of information that you can latch onto to sort of build your no off of, to say, it really sounds like this request would live best with the operations team because they handle things like this. So I can make that introduction and hand this off to them.
That is really good advice. And I almost appreciate the asking questions as a way to buy yourself a little bit of time. Like if your gut reaction is like, I do not want to do this thing they're asking me, but you're like, I know I shouldn't say it like that. It's like, let me ask some questions, build some time, and now I can create, almost like a storyline about why you're not the right fit, besides just, I know I'm not the right fit. Like that doesn't sound collaborative and being a team member. It's not usually met with a lot of like grace versus the person who's like, now I've at least seemed interested and asked a lot of questions. To be fair, maybe I did rethink what you just offered me, but it's still a no. And now I actually feel more certain about why it's a no for me. It's interesting too, because as someone who like I'm in the new role, I now have a boss, I'm not the boss. Saying no is deeply uncomfortable. There's a constant like what if in your brain of like, if I say no to this, what else are they not going to bring to me? If I say no too many times, will they just stop thinking about me? Like, should I say yes to this just because I said no to the last thing? Like, you can overthink this so quickly, and worry about, you talked about like your power, like your leveraging power. Like, am I losing that if I say too many times? What about the person who's like sitting from that viewpoint where they're like, maybe I feel like I'm pretty good at setting boundaries, but I'm wondering if I'm starting to come across as a person who is losing some of that power that you talked about in the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a struggle too, because, right, you want to be seen as a team player, but you also teach people how to treat you. You don't want to be too much
Right.
of a pushover. And in that chapter, I actually give a few different frameworks. After you dig for details, you can build on that with these frameworks. So, one for that type of person in particular could be the conditional yes, which is, I'm happy to do this now because I understand it's urgent, but I hope you understand I won't be able to accommodate a short timeline. And I won't always be able to accommodate a short timeline like this in the
Right.
future. Or could we sit down and figure out, how do we get ahead of these types of requests? Maybe we can put something in place so I have enough time to do this justice. And so it's a yes right now, but it's setting a boundary around those similar type of requests later. That's one thing you can do. I think what's most useful though, or what I come back to again and again, is what I call the trade-off approach, which is, the okay, I hear X is a priority. We had already discussed Y was important. And so I've been focused on that. I'm happy to make room for X, but to do that, what would you like me to deprioritize, slow down on, delegate, what have you? And the magic of that one again is it's more cooperative and joint problem solving, but it also subtly puts the power back in the other person's hand to say, I have given you the trade-offs here. I've given you maybe the risks or the information you need. You make the final call. And even with that, as the person who's trying to set that boundary, you could say, I recommend we would still prioritize Y for this reason. But at the end of the day, we'll follow what you think is best. So those are two ways that you can, again, it's about walking that fine line of negotiating priorities and also surfacing the information your higher ups need to make the right decisions, because they may not have visibility or line of sight into everything you're working on or the complexities at your level. They may be so far removed. So you bringing those things up actually does them a service because they just may not be aware.
Yeah, absolutely. Part of managing up and kind of using this as a tool for your own career growth, it's understanding your bosses or your managers' needs, their motivations, like what helps them do their job well. How do you get inside your manager's head? I mean, some people have managers who are probably really great communicators, and this is like they have no questions about this. But a lot of times your manager is busy and they might not be communicating, hey, this is the thing that is going to help me grow my career, or here's, my need and motivation. So how do you get into your quote boss's head?
Yeah. And this comes back to, I mentioned before that the entire book starts with the alignment conversation. And that's what it's about. Because if you don't start here, it's really easy to feel like you're spinning your wheels and not doing the right work or promotable work, or you spend a lot of time on something only to feel like the priority changes the next day. And so that just comes back to a key message of this book is that at the end of the day, managing up is not something you do for your boss. It's something you do to create the conditions for your own success. Now, that being said, we also start with the alignment conversation because in some ways it's a soft entrance because it's probably the conversation that's the most based around active listening and asking great questions. Most of us, as you were saying, lots of managers are very vague, they may be rushed. And so if you ask them just a general question like, well, what are your priorities right now? You may not get a straight answer. You may get a very tactical answer that doesn't actually get at beneath the surface. And so in that chapter, I think I give, probably a dozen different questions you can ask so you can pick the ones that feel most relevant to you. Some of my favorite, I think by and far, my favorite is what goals are most important to your boss? What goals and metrics do you discuss with them? That gives you really precise clarity into what your manager will care about. Because guess what? That's probably what they are being evaluated on their performance review, what their bonus may hedge on. And so the more you know about that, the better.
I also like to ask, like, or even I guess go on the hunt to understand like where is budget going toward? Like what projects are you funding? They're not going to put a ton of money behind things that don't matter to the bottom line, right? And so
Yep.
I also think the clues to look for in those conversations if you want to get in your boss's head is like not only what are they spending their time on, but what are they financing? What are they pulling resources to help support? I think that's always the key of like clearly something that they believe in or something that's important to them is getting that attention. Um, and I also just love that you come with a lot of questions because to your point, a lot of times your one-on-ones are, look, there's two schools of thought. One is that your manager should be running the one-on-one, but the other school of thought is like, if they're not, you should run the one-on-one and ask the specific questions. To go back to your first point, we're not managing up for our bosses. We are managing up for us and our own career success. And so that's a really important mindset shift. So come to your one-on-ones with thoughtful questions that allow you to collect more of those puzzle pieces to help you fill it out. I do want to talk about something else that happens at work, which is just, navigating office politics and, trying to maintain your integrity. And maybe if you have some emotional intelligence that is like off the charts, like I feel like this happens to a lot of women. This can be feeling like particularly hard. So how can you navigate, the stuff that comes with work while maintaining your integrity, your emotional intelligence, and not feeling like, you have to change your whole value system?
Yeah, and I'm just laughing because that's the most common question I hear, which is I don't want to manage up because it feels like extra emotional labor for me, and because I don't want to be conniving, Machiavellian. I don't play office politics, is what I hear.
Yeah, I don't want to play
And
the game.
yes, and I recognize that may feel very noble. At the same time, it can also be very naive, unfortunately, because the workplace is humans, even as much as AI is coming in. The workplace is still based on human dynamics, and power dynamics are a part of how humans work for millennia. And so, if we avoid them, then we're only going to hurt ourselves and our team. And I'm not saying that by quote unquote playing the game that you have to turn into someone you're not. I'll talk about that in a second. But think of it this way: if you have influence, sway, and power, well, then guess what? You have the ability to make changes on behalf of people you care about. And so I always say when good-hearted people are in power, everyone benefits. And so just think of it that way, that once you have more influence, then you can change policies, you can, bring ideas to the table that you want because you will have a bigger voice. Now, another mindset shift here is that being emotionally intelligent, being more sensitive, being very perceptive. Yes, I know it can feel like, well, this causes me to take everything so much more personally. But at the same time, it gives you an incredible advantage when it comes to managing up because you are noticing the subtleties, the nuances that other people miss. You're noticing if you're in a meeting and a couple of the executives start checking out, you can adapt your approach to say, let me slow down here and just check in. What is everyone taking away from this so far? Are we still on board with this? Right? You could do a temperature check because you've sensed that rather than barreling through. Or there's an entire chapter called The Styles Conversation, which is about dealing with different personalities and communication styles. And as part of that, you have to be able to read and observe people's behavior and start to decode, all right, is this person a very direct, task oriented communicator? Am I going to get through to them more if I actually focus on vision and the team's reputation? And so having that sort of adaptability, also being able to understand what are people's needs, wants, pressures, all of that makes you so much more convincing and persuasive. And you can do it because you're a good person. You can do it in an ethical way as well.
Yeah, and I think you get more out of the conversation when you determine. So, for example, I had a boss who was like, we were having one-on-ones, and they were like, "Look, you can treat these as status updates, or you can treat these as like therapy sessions." Like it really like it ran the range for him. Like he was sort of like, "It's your thing," but I could tell the therapy session piece of it, while it might have felt good to like vent, and I wasn't going to get the most out of this person. This person had a lot of influence. They were able to help me solve problems, open doors. Like they were a really good like partner for solving problems. And not to mention, by solving problems, I was giving them a lot of insight and telling them sort of like, here's what I'm doing, and here's like the doors I'm opening, and like who I'm collaborating, like all the things that bosses like to know that you're doing sort of behind closed doors. But it would feel not organic to like just mention it as like a bulleted list, right? And so even though, that person told me they were sort of open to either, it's like I can tell I'm personally going to get more out of the conversation if I treat this as more of a like not a status update, but like I've got these problems. What are your thoughts? Like give me your brainstorm. And I also learned a lot more about like the projects he was working on, or the rooms or people that he could influence. Like he'd be like, well, if you're having trouble with that, why don't I come to that meeting? And so I think when you talk about styles, not only is it important to understand the person's style, but to also be willing to adapt maybe your preferences in order to be like, look, to make the most of this one, I'm gonna use this style. Like I have the ability to adapt mine for this meeting. Which I think is part of managing up, right? Not every manager is going to be the same, not every person above them. So you do have to have that emotional intelligence and that adaptability piece. And you mentioned AI, and I think it's so funny because I almost think like emotional intelligence is going to become even more important than it's been because AI is going to help with a lot of other things. So if you are a person like me where you have a lot of emotional intelligence and you worry about things that you have no control over and forever it's been a problem, this might be our moment, you guys. It might be coming for us.
Mm.
Um, okay, you talked about visibility also, and I think that is so important, especially again, as someone who's back in a workplace and a very large workplace. There's like 13,000 people at Atlassian. What are some, ways that professionals can showcase their accomplishments without coming across as boastful or just like poor timing, like being like, okay, thanks for that brag moment. Nobody was talking about that. Like have it come across as a really natural way.
Yeah. And we'll get to the like specific tactics of how you talk about it in a second. But I think like let's pull back and talk about what you should bring visibility to, because you know this there's so much talk about, well, you have to be visible, make sure your work is seen and heard, and especially if you are in a hybrid workplace, you
Yeah.
don't get as many organic opportunities. But what I have seen, a common mistake people make is that they feel this pressure to bring visibility to every single thing they're doing. And when you do that, sometimes you can pigeonhole yourself into a role or a reputation, a brand that you don't want for yourself. If you are always bringing attention to how you are, the one who swoops in to save the team at the end of the day or to handle crisis communications, then you're going to get branded as that person. And that may not be where you want to be a year or two from now. And in the book, there's this exercise of crafting your 1 year career vision and then using that as your filter for what you want to bring visibility to, so that you are consciously crafting the perception of you that you want. And so I say that because I think a lot of us, again, we feel very reactive, like, oh, I did this thing, let me talk about it, when you have to be more selective than that. When it comes to visibility, I know you are a systems person, and so you may love this, but I am a big fan of keeping a story bank. And your story bank is a repository where you keep little anecdotes about things that have happened, because a week goes by really fast and it's very easy to forget the good things that we've done, the tough conversations we had, or the wins, the barriers we've had to overcome. And so your story bank is a place where you can capture all of that, keep those things top of mind so that you can deliver, I like to call it a pocket update, which is that like little 30 to 60-second spiel that when someone says, oh, how are you doing? What have you been up to? Before a meeting starts, you don't just kind of fritter that time away and say, oh, nothing, it's been busy or slow start to the year. Yeah. You have something crisp to deliver to say, oh, we've been working on this new AI initiative and it's been really interesting to see how it might impact our hiring. And that could pique someone's curiosity to say, oh, really? That's so interesting. I would love to hear more about that. Or you should talk to so and so. And so having those just um, crafted anecdotes for those little moments, but also finding ways to interject that in meetings and to tie it. I love to tie it to learning moments, to use it as an example of, let's say, your team is talking about some sort of strategy that you have to put together. And you could say, oh, well, actually, last quarter, when we were dealing with this, here is something we tried that was pretty successful. This is how it went. Maybe we should try this again. And so, in that way, you're not just saying, I'm so great. You're tying it to something useful to people in that moment.
Yeah, that is a really good idea to keep these stories because ultimately the stories are how people follow the work anyways. So we have a thing when you're interviewing for a job where it's like create your story circle, right? And it's the same exact idea for you do that when you're interviewing to kind of highlight your accomplishments. Why would you not do it when you're trying to highlight your accomplishments at work, right? And I think that's so great. I actually we use Slack for everything. So I just created a private Slack channel called Lauren's Wins. And I'm going to start dropping stories in there because I've been dropping like screenshots or compliments or things that people say. But I think I'm going to start writing stories for myself because it will be easier to share it later on and maybe even to remember it. So you've given me an idea, some inspiration. I really love that. Thank you. Um, Okay, you have, again, I want to go back to your conversation. So, negotiating compensation is daunting to say the least. How does managing up, though, actually help you approach money conversations with confidence, whether you are looking for a new job, but this one is probably specifically when you are negotiating your salary within a current role, right?
hmm Yeah. And the conversations again, they're set up so that you've been building social capital, you've been building trust along the way. If your manager actually feels like you're aligned with them, you're able to flex your style, you're setting boundaries in a diplomatic way. Basically, the whole thrust is about how do you position yourself as more of a partner and a trusted advisor to your manager versus just a order taker. And all of that really comes to fruition in the money conversation. And another common mistake that I see people make here is that they over index on what they've already done. They say, well, last year I increased sales by 20%. We grew the team this much. That's only one half of the equation when you're trying to make a case for extra money because your manager needs to go to their superiors and make a case for why should we give this person more money? What is the potential ROI if we give them more compensation? And so, yes, your past performance is part of that, but it's also future. And most of us leave that off. We just talk about the past and we don't talk about, okay, if I was compensated at this level or if I was promoted to director, I would be able to tackle these things. I would be able to work with these stakeholders. And having that future pacing is so important. I see you nodding your head, so I'll pause there for a second.
No, so I agree with this 100%. The way I look at it is indispensable versus being invaluable. Indispensable is like we can't afford to lose you because you're the order taker who's so good at this job. Like who's ever going to be as good at you as taking those orders? Invaluable is we can't afford to lose you because we can put you anywhere in the organization. You create value, you create impact, right? And so to your point, indispensable to me is the person who focuses on what they've already done versus invaluable is the person who is able to not just share what they've done, but also shape the future. Here's again, you can put me anywhere in the organization. I understand how to create value. It's like the person who can play different positions on the soccer field. If you can only play goalie, you're never going to leave goalie. If you can play goalie and defense and offense and whatever, I don't know soccer probably well enough to even use this metaphor, but the point being that then we can put you more places on the field. So I'm nodding my head because I'm like, we are saying the same thing said differently, but I like that you talk about what you've done, but focus at least 50%, maybe more on also what you're going to do. And I will say, as someone who's been in money conversations where people ask you about that, when you don't have a good answer for it, the room has never felt quieter and more like it's closing in on you. So do yourself a favor and do that so that your money conversation goes well. Um, okay, I know we're wrapping up, so I have two final questions. Okay, the first one is just that in your book, you do have a lot of real world examples and scripts. Can you share a particularly powerful example that really resonated with maybe your readers or clients for managing up?
Yeah, there's one story I come back to again and again. It's in the feedback chapter. And it was from one of my clients who was, he worked in a university for a pretty powerful dean, and they were hiring a new chief diversity officer. And the entire committee of other, administrators had voted for one woman who happened to be a Black female, and the dean was a white man. And my client went to the dean and said, the entire committee has voted for this person. Here is our recommendation. And the dean was resistant. And he it was clear to my client that the dean wanted someone who would be an order taker, who would not push back and challenge him, which this woman may have. She had different ideas for taking their programming and she had done more innovative things elsewhere. And so my client gave the dean this feedback. The dean did not take it and was very resistant and defensive about it. And the situation did totally backfire. He did not hire that person. Many people on that committee quit. And why I think it's a story that stands out is because at the end of the day, my client was able to put his head on the pillow and say, I did my part. I did what was in integrity for me, even if I didn't get the outcome I hoped for. And I think those are the most powerful stories that he was able to give that input tactfully and then sort of say, I have to let this situation play out, which is really difficult. But that's one that really stands out to me.
It makes me think of the Mel Robbins let them theory. Like,
Yes.
I've done what I can. Let them pick,
Mm-hmm.
have to let go of that control. As we wrap up, I'm very curious, what do you hope readers will take away from managing up and apply immediately in their careers?
I think a key lesson from the book is that idea of you teach people how to treat you. And you are not powerless, whether it can feel like that because there's reorgs every time, your head count is getting frozen, your skip level is canceling your meeting yet again. So a lot can feel like it's out of our control. But when you change how you show up, how the people around you starts to change as well. And so going back to boundaries, this is a perfect example of that. If you are always the person who is responding within seconds, people come to expect that of you. Or if you never speak up in meetings, then it's no wonder why you're having trouble gaining visibility. And so we teach people how to treat us. I think it's just a call to action for everyone to evaluate, like, what's the message I'm putting out there? Is it what I want? And how do I want to change that?
Yeah, because at the end of the day, we only can control our own actions. So it's like, what do you have the power of controlling within yourself, and then making those conscious, proactive decisions. This is amazing. I'm so happy we got to have this conversation. Managing up, I think, is, like I said, it's that management conversation that you forget is just as equally important, especially if you are a manager and you're like, I'm so focused on managing the people, below me, that I think I forget about above me. So thank you for writing this book and bringing this important topic, to the conversation. Melody, where can people learn more about you, follow your work, buy your book? Tell us all the things.
You can head to managingup.com. You'll find all of the details about the book there, as well as more information about me. And I'm very active on LinkedIn. So come over, say hello. I always love to know what people take away from the episode.
Amazing. Well, we all love LinkedIn, and by we all, me and the listeners. So I guarantee your inbox is going to have some activity. Thank you so much.